Here is the entire text you provided, seamlessly combined into one continuous paragraph without any line breaks, exactly as you requested. I'm Judge Judy Scheindlin. I spent 25 years on the family court bench in New York City. I have seen every flavor of human foolishness that exists. I presided over more than 20,000 cases. I have looked into the eyes of drug dealers, deadbeat fathers, con artists, and career criminals without blinking once. But in all, my years on the bench, on television, in every courtroom I have ever walked into, nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the morning case number 592C was called. I've said it 1,000 times on my show, and I'll say it again right now. Beauty fades, but dumb is forever. I didn't truly understand just how right I was until Vanessa Sterling floated through my courtroom doors. You think you know what arrogance looks like, honey? You think you've seen entitlement? I've dealt with entitled people my entire career. I wrote a whole book about it, but wait, just wait until you hear what happens when political royalty walks into a municipal courtroom and tries to rewrite the laws of the United States of America. Sit down. This one is going to take a minute. It was a Tuesday in July. The air conditioning in the courthouse was barely working, struggling against 90 heat. The docket was full of the usual misery: unpaid parking tickets, minor disputes, a few public intoxication charges. The room smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. Completely routine, completely ordinary, until my bailiff called out the name Vanessa Sterling. The moment that name was spoken, the entire atmosphere shifted like every molecule of oxygen had quietly excused itself from the room. The double doors at the back swung open, and in she walked. Vanessa Sterling, 22 years old, daughter of Senator Richard Sterling, one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C., a man whose face appeared on the nightly news so regularly you'd think he paid for the airtime. She did not walk, she floated. Bespoke cream-colored suit. I knew just from the stitching it cost more than my bailiff earns in 6 months. Hair pulled back in a severe, perfect shine. No jewelry except a single strand of pearls and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught my fluorescent courtroom lights like it was performing for them. But it wasn't the clothes that made my blood run cold. It was her eyes. She wore oversized designer sunglasses inside the building, and when she finally removed them, her expression was one of absolute crushing boredom, as if standing in my courtroom was the single most tedious inconvenience of her pampered little life. I've seen that look before. I saw it on the faces of wealthy defendants in Manhattan family court who thought a last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card. It never ended well for them either. Trailing behind her was no public defender, not even a local hotshot attorney. It was Arthur Vance, a capital fixer, the kind of lawyer who doesn't argue cases. He makes them disappear over golf games and overpriced dinners. He carried 3 leather briefcases and kept checking his watch as though this entire proceeding was a scheduling error by his secretary that he was simply too important to be bothered with. I've spent decades fighting for the people who walk into courtrooms scared and leave with justice. If that kind of story matters to you, go ahead and subscribe. There are plenty more where this came from, and I'm just getting warmed up. Vanessa walked past. The gallery, without looking left or right, didn't acknowledge my bailiff, certainly didn't look at the other side of the aisle. And that is where the true tragedy of this entire case begins. Sitting in the front row on the plaintiff's side was Mrs. Higgins, 62 years old, a retired elementary school librarian who had spent 40 years of her life teaching children to love reading. Small, frail, currently wearing a neck brace, her right arm locked in a complex sling pinned against her body. Beside her sat her husband, a man with calloused hands and a face etched deep with worry, holding her good hand so tightly his knuckles had gone completely white. They looked terrified. They looked exactly like the kind of people I spent my entire career fighting for, ordinary, decent, hardworking Americans who had already decided in their hearts that the system was going to crush them simply because they didn't carry a powerful last name. I have never, not once in 25 years, let that happen in my courtroom. I was not about to start today. Vanessa reached the defense table. She didn't sit. She pulled out her phone in my courtroom and began typing. Her lawyer whispered something and tried to gently lower her hand. She snatched it away, finished her text, and dropped the phone onto the table with a loud clack. Then she looked up at me, not with fear, not with an ounce of respect, with the expression of someone waiting for a waiter to come take her order. Now, I want you to understand something. I have had defendants cry in my courtroom. I have had defendants faint. I have had defendants try to lie directly to my face and fail spectacularly, but that look, that particular look of bored superiority, that one I take personally, because that look says you don't matter, and in my courtroom everybody matters. I cleared my throat. The sound echoed off the walls. Miss Sterling, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. In this courtroom, we stand when the judge addresses us and we turn off our cellular devices. She looked at her lawyer. She rolled her eyes slowly, deliberately, and then stood up painfully slowly. She did not turn the phone off. She simply flipped it face down. Let's just get this over with, she said loud enough For my microphone to catch every single syllable. I have a flight to Paris at 5 p.m. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have no patience for stupidity, and I have even less patience for expensive stupidity. And what I was watching unfold before me was the most expensive stupidity I had witnessed in years. My prosecutor, a young man named David Ross, who looked genuinely terrified to be prosecuting anyone named Sterling, presented the dashcam footage from the witness vehicle. The screen mounted on my courtroom wall flickered to life. High definition, unmistakable, devastating. The intersection of Main and 4th cross-traffic light turns yellow, then red. Solid, undeniable, legally absolute red. 1 second passes, 2 seconds. Mrs. Higgins' small Toyota Corolla begins to ease into the intersection on a green light, then a blur. A massive white Range Rover barreling in from the left. No brake lights, no. Attempt to slow, to swerve, to acknowledge the existence of another human being in that intersection. It was not a car, it was a missile. The SUV slammed into the driver's side of that Toyota with sickening, bone-crushing force. Glass exploded outward. The smaller car was lifted off the ground, spun violently through the air, and slammed into a light pole. In my courtroom, Mrs. Higgins turned her face into her husband's shoulder. She could not watch herself nearly die for a second time. Her husband wept in complete silence, his whole body shaking. I looked at Vanessa. She was watching the footage with mild interest, the casual, detached way you might glance at a boring commercial before your movie starts. It looks worse on video than it felt, she said, breaking the silence of the room. Honestly, the airbags in the Rover are incredible. I barely felt a bump, but my coffee spilled all over my interior. Do you know how hard it is to get latte out of white Italian leather? I have a saying I've used my entire career. I'm the boss, applesauce. And right now, the boss was using every ounce of 25 years of judicial discipline not to come across that bench. Miss Sterling, I said, my voice dangerously low, you are watching a video of yourself nearly killing a woman and you are concerned about coffee. Stains, she scoffed. She's fine. Look at her. She's sitting right there. It's just a car. My dad's insurance will buy her a new one, probably a better one. She should honestly be thanking me. That thing she was driving was an eyesore. I did the neighborhood a favor by totaling it. Arthur Vance closed his eyes. He looked as though he was experiencing genuine physical pain. Vanessa, please, he whispered through his teeth. Stop talking. No, Mr. Vance, I said. Let her speak. It is extremely illuminating. I turned my chair to face her fully. Now I want you to understand the anger inside me was gone, completely replaced by something colder and far more useful, absolute clinical determination. I have looked at thousands of defendants across my bench, and I could always identify the moment I understood exactly what I was dealing with. This was that moment. I was looking at a young woman who had been so thoroughly insulated from consequence for her entire life that she had never once been forced to develop the basic human capacity for empathy. She didn't lack it out of cruelty. She lacked it because nobody had ever required it of her. That was about to change. Miss Sterling, I said, you seem to believe the value of a person is determined entirely by their price tag. So let me ask you something. What is the price of fear? What is the price of a 62-year-old woman being too terrified to get behind a wheel for the rest of her life? What is the price of a husband watching his wife scream in pain and being completely powerless to stop it? She sighed, long, loud, theatrical. I don't know, Judge. 20 grand. Just give me a number. I have a limit on my black card, but I can call the bank to lift it. I stood up. The motion was sudden enough that my bailiff took an instinctive step forward. You think this is a negotiation? My voice filled the room. You are not at a car dealership haggling over a trade-in. You are in a court of law, and in this room, we do not trade in dollars. We trade in accountability. And right now, Miss Sterling, your account is completely, utterly overdrawn. Then came the phone call. My father is going to be calling soon. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't quite started yet. I slowly removed my reading glasses, placed them on the bench. I looked at Arthur Vance, whose face had gone the particular shade of pale usually reserved for people who have just realized a very expensive mistake is about to become catastrophically more expensive. Counselor, I said, my voice dropping to a register I reserve for moments of absolute seriousness, did your client just attempt to intimidate a sitting judge with political influence? Vance opened his mouth. Your Honor, she's under considerable stress. She didn't mean ring. The sound sliced through his sentence like a blade, not a standard ringtone. The Star-Spangled Banner, full volume, in the middle of my courtroom proceedings. I have presided over 25 years of cases. I have seen defendants do extraordinary things in my courtroom, but I have never had the national anthem played at maximum volume during an active hearing. Any reasonable person would have lunged to silence. It would have gone crimson with embarrassment, would have apologized before the second note played. Vanessa Sterling did none of those things. She smiled, cold, triumphant, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She picked up the phone. Hello? Not whispering, not even attempting to lower her voice. "Daddy, yeah, I'm still here. This judge is being difficult. She won't let Arthur write the check." The entire courtroom gasped. Mrs. Higgins covered her mouth with her good hand. My bailiff, Officer Miller, caught my eye across the room waiting for my signal. I held up one hand. I wanted to see exactly how far this was going to go. "I know," Vanessa continued, inspecting her cuticles while conducting a conversation with a United States senator in the middle of active court proceedings. "She's acting like she's important. Can you just fix this? I really need to get to the airport. The jet is waiting." She paused, listening. Then she held the phone out toward me. "He wants to talk to you." I did not move. I did not reach for the phone. I looked at her outstretched hand the way I look at every piece of nonsense that comes across my bench, with complete unimpressed stillness. "Miss Sterling," I said, "put the phone down." "But it's the senator," she insisted, waving it like a magic wand that had always worked before and simply couldn't understand why it wasn't working now. "He says he can explain everything. He says he knows your boss. I have a saying I've repeated many times. I am the boss. There is no boss above me inside my courtroom. Not a senator, not a president, nobody." I said, I repeated, and now my voice boomed off every wall. "In that room, put the phone down." She flinched. For the first time since she'd floated through those doors, a genuine crack appeared in the porcelain mask. She lowered the phone, but she didn't end the call. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "My dad owns this town. He owns the mayor. He owns the police chief, and he definitely owns you. If you don't take this call, your career is over." There it was, the threat completely stripped of pretense, naked corruption standing before me in a cream-colored designer suit, not even bothering to disguise itself anymore. I stood up, my chair scraped loudly across the floor. "Bailiff," I said, "seize that device." Officer Miller stepped forward. Vanessa clutched the phone to her chest. "Don't you touch me. This is private property. Arthur, do something." Vance looked like a man who desperately wanted to be on a different planet. "Miss Sterling," he hissed, "give him the phone." Now, furiously, reluctantly, she surrendered it. Officer Miller brought it to my bench. The call was still active. The screen read, "Dad." I looked at the phone. I looked at the camera recording my proceedings, and then I pressed the end call button. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard in 25 years on a bench. "Miss Sterling," I said, "you just made two critical errors. First, you assumed that justice is a conference call away. Second, you assumed I care about your father's title." I placed the phone on my bench, screen down. "Let me be perfectly clear. The only title that matters inside this room is defendant, and right now you are digging a hole so deep that even a United States senator cannot pull you out of it." The phone vibrated once, twice, then went still. The link to Washington had been cut. "Now that we have successfully disconnected the legislative branch from the judicial branch," I said with the particular dryness I have spent a lifetime perfecting, "let us return to the facts of this case. This is exactly why I have spent my entire career showing up for the Mrs. Higginses of this world. If you believe courtrooms should be places where truth wins regardless of whose name is on the door, subscribe. It means more than you know." I looked down at the paperwork before me and picked up my pen. "In 25 years, I have sentenced people to jail time, community service, fines, and probation. I have seen every variation of guilt. I have watched genuine remorse transform defendants in front of my eyes. I know the difference between a person who made a terrible mistake and a person who does not yet understand that mistakes have consequences." Vanessa Sterling was the latter, emphatically, dangerously the latter. "Mr. Vance, your client has pleaded no contest to the facts of this case. She has admitted to speeding. She has admitted to reckless driving. She has admitted to contempt of this court, and she has demonstrated a level of remorse that I can only describe as non-existent." Vance stood buttoning his jacket with the weary energy of a man who knows he has already lost. "Your Honor, we ask for probation, community service. My client is a student with a bright future. A custodial sentence would be entirely inappropriate. If you believe courtrooms should be places where truth wins regardless of whose name is on the door, subscribe. It means more than you know." I looked down at the paperwork before me and picked up my pen. "In 25 years, I have sentenced people to jail time, community service, fines, and probation. I have seen every variation of guilt. I have watched genuine remorse transform defendants in front of my eyes. I know the difference between a person who made a terrible mistake and a person who does not yet understand that mistakes have consequences." Vanessa Sterling was the latter, emphatically, dangerously the latter. "Mr. Vance, your client has pleaded no contest to the facts of this case. She has admitted to speeding. She has admitted to reckless driving. She has admitted to contempt of this court, and she has demonstrated a level of remorse that I can only describe as non-existent." Vance stood buttoning his jacket with the weary energy of a man who knows he has already lost. "Your Honor, we ask for probation, community service. My client is a student with a bright future. A custodial sentence would be entirely inappropriate." And there he stood, taller than he appeared on television, radiating enough controlled fury to heat the room by 10. Two men in dark suits flanked him, positioned to block the only exit. "You," Sterling said, pointing directly at me, "you are the person who thinks they can kidnap my daughter." I did not stand up. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my sandwich, chewed, swallowed, wiped my mouth with a napkin. "Senator Sterling," I said, "welcome to municipal court. The word you're looking for is incarcerate, not kidnap, and generally people knock. Do not play games with me," he said, slamming both hands onto my desk hard enough to scatter papers across the floor. "Do you have any idea what you have done? I have made several calls on the drive over here. I know your record. I know your pension status. I can have you removed from this bench before sunset. I can have this courthouse audited until you personally beg for mercy. Release her now, expunge the record, and apologize." It was a masterful performance, the voice of a man who had genuinely destroyed careers with a single whispered phone call. But he made one critical mistake. He assumed I wanted something from Washington. I stood up. I am not a physically imposing woman, but I have learned over the course of a long career that authority is not about size. It is about absolute certainty. And in that moment, I had never been more certain of anything in my life. "Senator," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "your daughter is in a cell because she drove a 2-ton vehicle through a red light at 60 miles per hour. She is in a cell because she left a 62-year-old woman bleeding in the street, and she is in a cell because she stood in my courtroom and laughed about it. She's a child," he said. "She made a mistake. We write a check. We move on. That is how the world works." "Not today," I said. I turned my laptop around to face him and pressed play. Not the crash footage, the courtroom footage. The moment Vanessa laughed at Mrs. Higgins. The moment she said that thing she was driving was an eyesore. I did the neighborhood a favor. The moment she tried to purchase justice for $10,000. The moment she threatened me with her father's name and his phone call. Senator Sterling watched. His jaw was set at first, the expression of powerful man who has arrived prepared to fight. But as the video played, as he heard his daughter's voice dripping with casual cruelty, as he watched her mock a woman who had done absolutely nothing to deserve any of it, something changed in his face. The color drained away. His hands, still flat on my desk, began to tremble slightly. He watched Vanessa threaten a sitting judge. He watched her scream at my bailiffs. He watched the mask of the perfect senator's daughter peel away to reveal something ugly underneath, something that had been growing unchecked for 22 years. The video ended. The room was absolutely still. His security detail studied the floor with great interest. "That," I said quietly, "is what you raised, Richard. That is what a lifetime of writing a check and moving on produces. You didn't protect her, you built her. And today I didn't kidnap your daughter. I stopped her before she killed someone." Senator Sterling slowly straightened up. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he looked at me. The fire was completely gone. He looked old. He looked like a man who had just understood, truly understood, perhaps for the first time, that all the power in the world is completely useless against the consequences of your own failures. "Where is she?" he asked. The voice that had shaken rooms full of powerful people was barely a whisper. "She is in processing," I said. "Do you want me to have her released into your custody pending appeal?" He closed his eyes. He took a long, slow breath, and then he said 5 words that I will carry with me for the rest of my career on this bench. "No, leave her in there. Not release her immediately. Not I'll call the governor. Not do you know what I can do to you. No, leave her in there." I looked at him for a long moment. "Are you certain, Senator?" "Once the paperwork is processed, she remains in the system. No treatment, no private accommodations. She will be treated exactly like every other inmate in that facility." He nodded. He picked up his hat. "She has spent 22 years believing the world bends to her will because of my name. If she doesn't learn right now, she never will. And next time, she might actually kill someone." He walked toward the door, then he stopped, reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed a checkbook, the same pocket where he kept the phone he used to call presidents. He wrote a check, tore it carefully from the book, and set it on my desk beside my sandwich wrapper. "For Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "It's from my personal account, $50,000. It doesn't fix what Vanessa did, but tell her, please tell her I'm sorry I didn't raise a daughter who knew better. She looked for the first time genuinely human. Mrs. Higgins made a full recovery with the senator's money. She bought a safe, reliable SUV. She paid off every medical bill. She and her husband took a vacation together, their first in 10 years. She told me afterward that she had forgiven Vanessa, not because Vanessa had earned it, but because, in her words, hate is too heavy a burden for a heart that has already survived so much. 40 years of teaching children that the world was worth believing in had not been wasted after all. 2 years later, I was sitting in a diner near the courthouse. A waitress came over to refill my coffee. I didn't look up at first. "More coffee, Judge." I went completely still. I knew that voice. I looked up. It was Vanessa. Simple uniform, hair in a ponytail, no diamonds, no pearls, just a small name tag that read Vanessa. She saw the recognition in my eyes. She didn't run. She didn't get angry. She just poured the coffee. I hated you for a long time, she said quietly. I sat in that cell and I planned 1,000 different ways to ruin you, and now? I asked. She looked out the window at the street for a moment. Now I think you saved my life. I was heading straight off a cliff, Judge. I just couldn't see it because I was driving a Range Rover. A real smile crossed her face, not a smirk, not a performance, a real earned human smile. Enjoy your coffee, Your Honor. It's on the house. She walked away to take care of a table of construction workers. I watched her go. I have said many things from my bench over the years. Some of them have been replayed on television more times than I can count. But the truest thing I know after 25 years of sitting in judgment of my fellow human beings is this: justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, the best times, it's about waking someone up before it's too late. Senator Sterling was right. He could not buy his daughter character. She had to earn it, one shift at a time. If this story reminded you that the courtroom can still be a place where truth wins, where an ordinary woman in a neck brace matters just as much as a senator's daughter in Prada, then subscribe, because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told.